everyone.
Welcome.
We're just going to take a few minutes and let the room fill up. We've got a large group joining us this evening virtually, so we'll get started in a couple of moments, but thank you for joining us tonight from wherever you are. We, of course, have attendees from all across Canada and the world, which is amazing to see. So a lot of people interested in Dr. Langtree's presentation, which should be amazing. For those that aren't familiar with our foundation, my name is Jeff Robertson. I'm the Executive Director for the PKD Foundation of Canada. This evening's event is just one of many that we host throughout the year. Educational events, complimentary, of course, on a variety of PKD-related topics. Tonight's is, of course, on why does ADPKD severity vary between family members? Our next one coming up is going to be for the French language, and it's going to be on diet and polycystic kidney disease. So if you don't get our newsletters, I encourage you to go to npkd.ca, sign up to receive our monthly e-newsletters. It helps you stay in the know on events like this, things that are happening both in your community, around the country, and around the world as well. So we've got a good group of people in here, so we'll get started. We're joined, of course, this evening by Dr. Matt Lanktree. Dr. Lanktree is a clinician-scientist, assistant professor, and medical director of the McMaster Kidney Genetics Clinic, where he cares for patients with chronic and end-stage kidney disease. Dr. Lanktree has published over 60 articles in genetics and medicine, and has set his goals to use genetics to improve the care of patients with kidney disease. He's no stranger to the foundation. Matt's done a number of these events for us, and we're always grateful to have him here. So without any further ado, Matt, I'll throw to you.
Well, thanks so much, Jeff, for that kind introduction, and welcome to everybody for coming tonight. I'm really honored to have this opportunity. The PKD Foundation has been a great support for me throughout my training and over the years. So I'm really honored to be here. And as well, you know, I think speaking at a patient forum is also, you know, just fantastic. Like, patient partners have so much to add to the whole research journey, all the way from research project conception, enrollment, to interpretation, and then dissemination and translation of those results. And so I'm really excited for tonight to have the opportunity to speak somewhat candidly and with some time about something that's really of great interest to me. So as Jeff said, I'm at McMaster in Hamilton. I'm a kidney doctor who takes care of people with PKD and other forms of CKD. And my research program is based around PKD and chronic kidney disease in general. And really how genetics can alter the outcomes in polycystic kidney disease, as well as CKD in general. So tonight I'm talking about a question that really struck me back in my fellowship, my nephrology training, when I was training to become a kidney doctor. And that was, you know, why, if polycystic kidney disease, or ADPKD, is a genetic condition, if family members have the same causative mutation, then how come I see some patients in front of me that have such different disease severity? So I'm going to go into a bit of a fairly background information about PKD, and then I'm going to delve into the basis of this question, and then I'm going to go through some of the reasons that kind of explain why we can get intrafamilial variability, is the fancy term, but essentially how family members can have slightly different disease presentations. So before I get too far into it, I do want to disclose that I have received consulting and advisory fees from Otsuka, which is the manufacturer of tolvaptan, as well as Bayer, Sanofi, and Reata. I would say that absolutely nothing that I say tonight was provided or endorsed or has anything to do with those companies. I also have received research funding from the American Society of Nephrology, the Canadian Society of Nephrology, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the Canadian Kidney Foundation, and the PKD Foundation. So those are where funding for my research projects come from, and then of course I am involved in patient care and taking care of patients. So before we get into polycystic kidney disease, just some background. What do the kidneys do? This is a common conversation that I have with patients in clinic. We have two kidneys that filter about 200 liters of blood per day to remove water and water-soluble waste. The kidneys are the main regulator of blood pressure. Most people think of the heart would do that, or the blood vessels. But the kidneys and the hormones that they create and react to in the management of salt and water, the kidneys are the main regulators of our blood pressure. As I mentioned, they control the salts, which are essential for all of our cells to do their normal functions. So salts like sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium are all required for the beating of our hearts, the contraction of our muscles. So really an essential part of the kidney function. They secrete a hormone called erythropoietin, which then goes to our bones in order to make more red blood cells. So that's a hormone we need to replace if the kidneys stop working properly. And as well, they're responsible for activating vitamin D, which is required for the absorption of calcium from our stomach, our gut, in order to have healthy bones. So all this to say, the kidney's, a vital organ. I'm a little biased. It's maybe my favorite organ, but it really is essential, and we have two of them. So what is autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease, or ADPKD? So ADPKD is a genetic disease. It affects about 1 in 500 in the population, and about 1 in 5, between 15 and 20% of people with polycystic kidney disease don't have a family history, do not. So that means the majority of people, about 80%, will have a positive family history, meaning either their mother or their father has the same disease. ADPKD does not skip generations. Either your parent, it can't skip generations. It has to go through each generation of the family. ADPKD is specific to the kinds of mutations that cause it, and so we often differentiate it from just PKD, or polycystic kidney disease, which is more of a general blanket. In ADPKD, cysts develop in both kidneys. Typically, there are atypical situations where that doesn't occur, but again, the vast majority of the time, the cysts form in both kidneys. The kidneys grow in time. This is a feature of polycystic kidney disease that helps us diagnose it. So the cysts predictably grow throughout life, and as a result, the overall kidneys grow in size throughout life. And it can range from having multiple larger cysts, even as big as grapefruits or softballs, and really big cysts, or sometimes it's more like a bag of marbles. So lots and hundreds of very small cysts, all the way down to 3 millimeter or 4 millimeter microscopic kind of cysts. What is a cyst? A cyst is simply, so the kidney is full of these functional units called nephrons. So we have the filter that filters the blood is called the glomerulus, and then we have a tube after that that manages the reabsorption of salt and water. Those are called, the whole unit is called a nephron. Our kidneys are made of millions of nephrons. And so the cysts form by an outpouching of that tubule before it eventually closes off and forms this fluid-filled sac, or a cyst. As I said, with time, we get more and more of these cysts. The cysts grow and the overall kidney size grows. Here's for scale is a football. And so people can have quite large, over 20 centimeter kidneys, as large as 2-liter bottles of pop, essentially. You can imagine that can lead to significant symptoms. So kidney issues that result from this growing kidney and the cysts within it. So for sure, pain and discomfort is very common. Not so much earlier in the course of disease, but certainly as the kidneys get quite large, the cysts can put pressure on the abdominal wall, on the sides and back. It can put pressure on other organs. And even though the kidney itself doesn't have nerves in it that conduct pain, certainly all the tissue around it and the drainage system of the kidney can feel pain. Kidney stones are quite common, and they can cause little blockages in the kidney, which can lead to pain. That's usually more of an acute onset, sharp type pain. Bleeding and infection can happen within the cysts. So either the cyst can rupture, that can cause blood to go into the urine, or it can bleed into the cyst where blood doesn't come out in the urine, but these events can cause pain and require antibiotics and imaging. Predictably, as the kidney gets larger, the cysts put pressure on the other nephrons, the other tubules around in the kidney. And so eventually the function of the kidney starts to decline in time. The filtering units of the kidney can leak bits of protein into the urine, which shouldn't usually happen with normal kidney function. We shouldn't have any protein in our pee. It's not usually a large amount of protein that we can see in other kidney diseases, but certainly you can still get some protein in the pee in PKD. And then as well, because the kidneys are the main controller of blood pressure, pretty much everybody with ADPKD will develop high blood pressure in time. Outside of the kidney, it's a multi-system disease. So the gene that carries the mutation is in every cell in our body. And so it can affect multiple places in the body. The most common is liver cysts. About 3/4 or even more of people, if we do special imaging, will have cysts in their liver as well as in their kidney. It's very common to get cysts in the pancreas. Diverticulosis is an outpouching of the bowels that can lead to issues, especially in the context of constipation. So if people are getting bloating or GI type symptoms from constipation, hernias, so in the umbilicus or in the groin, are quite common in patients with polycystic kidney disease. There is lungs and heart. These are much less common. Less than 1% of people with polycystic kidney disease have issues there. And then intracranial aneurysms is another common, so about 5 to 7% of people with polycystic kidney disease can have intracranial aneurysms, which is about 4 or 5 times more common than the general population. ADPKD is bad luck. This is an important thing I think for patients to realize. It's nobody's fault. It's just biology that there's an error in this one gene that leads to the predictable growth in these cysts and the growth in total kidney size. It is going, the natural history of ADPKD, unfortunately, is that it is going to progress. So even as we do our very best and things that we talk about today to slow the progression of the disease, and hopefully not have it be a problem, the natural history is that the kidneys do grow. As I mentioned, the kidney function, so GFR or glomerular filtration rate is one of the estimates we have of kidney function. So it's usually in the normal range throughout the second, third, and fourth even decades of life before it starts declining. Importantly, the cysts in the kidney start growing well before there's the decline in that GFR into the abnormal range. So which is one of the reasons why imaging is so important in determining the severity of people's ADPKD. So a little bit of a genetics primer, a little bit of background. So we are made, and I mean, this is amazing to me. If you went back in time 50, 60 years, this all seems like science fiction. And it's based on a wealth of research, literally over decades, that has given us these kind of insights. So we're made of billions of cells, and each one of those cells contains a DNA recipe book. So that recipe book includes the instructions for every protein that's required for the functioning to be a human. One of those proteins is polycystin 1, and another one is polycystin 2, encoded by the PKD1 and PKD2 genes. Proteins are responsible for all our cell functions, so sending and receiving messages, for all of the enzymatic reactions that happen within our cells, the making of energy and converting things like our food into the energy that our cells need. So proteins are really important. We have two sets of all of our genes. One that is a mix-up of your mom's two pairs of genes, and the other that's a mix-up of your dad's two pairs of genes. So we have two sets, one from our mom and one from our dad. We have about 30,000 genes within our genome, our set of DNA. There's over 3 billion letters in the human genome, and it only takes one of those letters to be altered in the wrong way to lead in either PKD1 or PKD2 that leads to ADPKD. Now, I should say, and there's probably many people in the lecture tonight that are really familiar with genetics and are maybe aware that we're starting to learn that some rare cases can be caused by mutations in other genes. So maybe I'll get into that a little later tonight, but still primarily ADPKD is caused by mutations in either PKD1 or PKD2. So as I mentioned, we all have two copies of our genes, one from our mom and one from our dad. If somebody has ADPKD, their children have a 50-50 chance of getting the copy of the gene. So if the dark one is the one that has the change that leads to the cyst formation, then the father gives one of the two copies to each of their child. So there's a 50-50 chance that the child, regardless of whether they're a boy or a girl, will get that gene that carries that change. It does not skip generations. Now that said, I said there's 20% of families where there's unknown family history. So there's essentially two reasons for, well, so either, we didn't know about the history in the parents. So sometimes there's things like non-paternity, or they're estranged, or they're not around. Sometimes it's that people unfortunately pass of other things before the diagnosis is made. So those are all kind of explanations. And then sometimes it is what we call a de novo, or that's Greek for a new mutation. So that accounts for a small percentage. So about 1 in 5 don't have an affected parent, but most people do have an affected parent. So this is a kidney survival curve. So this is actually work from my postdoc when I was working with Dr. Pei at University of Toronto. And so we looked at all of the patients. So there's over 1,000 people with polycystic kidney disease from Dr. Pei's cohorts, and we looked at the different types of mutations. So each curve here is the group of people that have the most severe PKD1 mutations down to PKD2 mutations, to those that we couldn't find the cause of the mutation. And the line here, so on the Y, is the percent of people that had normal or had kidneys that had not reached end-stage kidney disease or kidney failure requiring transplant or a kidney replacement therapy. So at the beginning, everybody's kidneys work, and in time, more people develop severe kidney disease. So across here, the middle, this would be 1/2 of the people with that mutation. So about half of the people with the most severe form reach kidney failure by about age 50. With the milder forms, the milder mutations, half of the people reach kidney failure in their late 70s, mid 70s, late 70s. So we can see there is an association between the type of mutation and how severe it is. Remembering that all family members have the same main effect mutation, the same mutation that's passed down and causing the disease. But here I've plotted just the distribution of the people that have that most severe mutation. So while I said half have reached kidney failure by the time they're about age 50, you can see there's still a wide distribution, with some people not reaching it until they're up 70, while other people having kidney failure when they're much younger. So even with the most severe mutation, there are some people that have relatively milder disease. So we have the same mutation type, and it's static throughout life, and it's in all of our cells, which is why we can take a cheek swab or a blood sample to check for that genetic mutation. We don't need kidney tissue to look for it. So in contrast to that, when we look at imaging of the kidney, so these are both MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging. So this is, the best kind of imaging we have for polycystic kidney disease. And you can see this is the left and right kidney here. The head's at the top, feet are at the bottom. And this is the spine in the middle. And clearly the person on the right here has much more severe kidney disease. Here, their kidney is this big thing. The white is the water, the fluid-filled cysts. And you can see that these kidneys are much larger and much more full of cysts. So both of these people have PKD1 mutations. The one on the left is 36, the one on the right is 46. And here we have the Mayo classification, which is a ranking, and we sort people from A with the mildest disease to E with the most severe disease. So imaging is the best test we have to assess the progression of disease up to this point in time. So while the genetics can help with diagnosing, the best test we have to determine severity is really imaging. So what about those family members and how it seems similar but can also be different? So interestingly, if we look at monozygotic twins, so monozygotic twins means they came from the same fertilized egg and then separated, so they're genetically identical. Twins reach kidney failure on average within 2 years of each other. So you can see those people have very similar genetics, and they actually do have very similar disease severity. 2/3 of people with ADPKD will reach kidney failure at an age within 7 years of an affected family member. So that means what I see in clinic frequently is that if the parent had kidney disease and reached kidney failure, say at 52, then 2/3 of their children will reach kidney failure within 7 years of that. Now that does mean that 1/3 of those families, there will be people that are more than that apart. So you'll get one person with kidney failure at 43 and the other person who doesn't reach kidney failure until they're 65. And so we talked about these as extremely discordant or very different. And so looked at some of these families to try and get ideas as to why there could be situations where there's big differences, even though they had the same mutation underlying their disease. And of course, the families, the more affected family members there are in the family, the more likely we are to find individuals that are very different. So the main hypothesis or the main aim of my talk tonight was to talk about if ADPKD is caused by a genetic mutation and family members all have the same genetic mutation, then why do some family members have more severe disease and other family members have milder disease? So what are some possible explanations? So one, that other habits, exposures, or environments, so the ways that people live, the environment impacts the progression of their polycystic kidney disease. Another possible explanation is that there's another kidney disease that's compounding the problem. Another is that the treatments that people are taking, how well they tolerate those treatments, how well they adhere, so how well they're able to manage to take those medications or those interventions. And then finally, is there additional genetic factors over and above that mutation that explains the differences? So first off, I think everybody's likely aware that smoking isn't a great idea. I often say that, you may know someone who made it late in their life and smoked the whole time and never had a problem. Certainly, we know that smoking increases the risk of vascular disease. Part of polycystic kidney disease is regional hypoxia, so not enough oxygen getting to areas of the kidney. So there is little doubt that smoking is a bad idea in polycystic kidney disease. So first thing we can do is definitely avoid that. Overweight and obesity as predictors of progression in polycystic kidney disease. So this was an observational study, meaning they looked at people that were enrolled. They were actually enrolled in a randomized trial of blood pressure control, but then they looked at the outcomes of the people during that trial stratified by their weight at the start of the study. And they found that the people with higher body mass index, so the heavier people, had faster progression of their disease, whether we measured it by increase in their kidney size or by the rate at which their GFR or their kidney function declined over time. So this is, not conclusive evidence, but it's definitely suggestive that slighter people have slower progression of disease. Well, what about other complications of polycystic kidney disease? Do people have more back pain, more, so pain in general? So this was a study that looked at pain symptoms and compared people that were overweight or obese versus referent people that were not. And indeed, they did find some evidence for worse pain symptoms in people that were heavier. Now, again, it's observational, and so it can be a little problematic, but certainly, again, it's suggestive evidence that people do better when they're lighter. What about some ideas like time-restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, or ketosis diets? So the next lecture in the PKD series is on diet. So I'm not going to go too deep into the dietary habits. Certainly, there's some really compelling evidence from model organisms that suggest that potentially these kind of strategies could be effective at slowing progression. That said, we're still waiting for higher quality trials to really support that. Salt intake, similarly, there's evidence where if we look at how much salt people take in, it seems like there is an association. So people that have less salt have slower disease progression. Protein gets broken down into nitrogenous waste is the fancy word, but essentially the breakdown product of protein needs to be cleared from the bloodstream. And so that's just putting a little bit of an extra tax on the kidney as, on that kidney function. So again, certainly we don't want really high protein intake. We probably don't want really low protein intake. And so that really leads me to the Canada Food Guide. The Canada Food Guide was just recently updated with input from dietitians, as nutritionists, as well as nutritional experts. And so, I really advocate for people to follow the Canada Food Guideline. Incorporation of a wide spectrum of healthy fruits and vegetables, modest protein intake, making water our primary drink of choice, and choosing whole grains where we are intaking carbohydrates. So it's difficult to push this because it's not the fad, it's not the trend, it's not the trendy kind of stuff. There's no simple bullet. I do think that avoiding manufactured foods, whether it's packaged or from a restaurant or food producer, generally those packaged foods, they're incentivized to include sugar and salt to make us come back and buy more of it. So the more that we're in the kitchen and cooking and eating, whole foods, I think the better off we're gonna do. And, certainly trying to aim for, those lower body mass indexes. So, less than 28 certainly, and ideally less than 25, I would say. What about water intake? Well, our body has some very complicated regulation mechanisms, ways of our body to control how much water we need to intake. And so our brain senses when our blood has an excess of salt, i.e. it's not dissolved in enough water, or our blood is thick, so to speak, and it sends a hormone called antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin, which then goes to the kidneys and specifically to those tubules that form the cysts, and tell those tubules work harder, absorb more water. It also sends us the signal that we're thirsty to go get some more water. Now, that signal, unfortunately, we've come to learn causes those kidney cells to replicate, to work harder. And so this leads to faster growth of those cysts. So really, it was seminal work by a group of scientists that figured out that if we can block this hormone, this signal from our brain to our kidneys to get more of those cells and for those cells to work, to calm down essentially, that it slows the progression of polycystic kidney disease. So that leads to the natural question, well, instead of taking a drug that blocks this, can I just drink more water to make sure that my brain never sends that signal to my kidneys to absorb more water? I would also say that it makes sense at this point that if we take a drug that prevents the action of this antidiuretic hormone, it shouldn't be surprising that the effect is that the kidney doesn't work as hard at absorbing water. You make lots of pee and you become very thirsty. So just in the last year, I am going to talk about that tolvaptan a little later, but just in the last year, there was a study where they randomized people to drink as much water as they wanted, so-called ad libitum, and compared them to people that they gave a prescription to drink 3 liters of water. And so you can see here, they collected the urine in a jug, and this is the difference in the amount of water these people were able to drink. So the so-called control arm, they still drank 2.5 liters of water a day, and they compared the outcomes of that with the people that did manage to drink 3 liters a day. So there was a faster growth in the people that drank less water, but it was not statistically different. So you can see these lines are pretty close to each other and the points really overlap on each other. Similarly, when they looked at the rate of decline, there was slightly slower decline in the people who drank lots of water, but again, they weren't statistically different. So some would say, oh, maybe there's not that much of a difference of drinking 2.5 liters a day versus drinking 3 liters a day. I do think we can take this to really, provide evidence, in those tolvaptan trials, they encouraged people to drink as much as they could drink, regardless of whether they were on the medication or not. So I do feel, especially in people with the more severe disease, the benefits of tolvaptan are gonna outweigh us just drinking as much as we can. At the same time, there are benefits of water intake in preventing kidney stones, potentially in reducing calorie intake. So I'm still in the position, if people aren't in a situation where they need tolvaptan or they don't want tolvaptan, I do encourage people to try to drink 3 liters of water a day, albeit it's not going to be a slam dunk and really stop the progression of polycystic kidney disease. Well, kidney stones. So 10 to 25% of patients with polycystic kidney disease will have a kidney stone. Those with stones do get larger cysts and bigger kidneys, and those with stones have faster decline in kidney function. The best prevention for kidney stones is kind of the stuff we just talked about. So making sure that our urine is in a large volume of water so that the calcium and the oxalate, the things that fall out to form the stones, don't get at a high enough concentration to form stones. So, water intake, avoiding excess salt, avoiding excess animal protein, avoiding vitamin supplements. If we take excess vitamin supplements, they end up just getting urinated out, and they can form something for stones to grow upon. Avoiding excess dietary calcium and really focusing on dietary calcium sources. So we focusing on things like milk and cheese and yogurt, good sources of calcium like that is the best place to get it. So certainly, if one family member gets lots of stones or one family member drinks lots of water, potentially that could contribute to differences. What about 2 kidney diseases? So certainly in the patients that I take care of with polycystic kidney disease, I do have a handful of patients that have been unfortunate enough to have 2 separate diseases that are contributing. So they can be of this group of diseases called glomerulonephritis, which is a mouthful, but it's inflammatory or inflammation diseases of the kidney, like lupus nephritis, or vasculitis. So, and I apologize for those kind of jargon big words, but these are additional kidney diseases that just because you're unlucky and have ADPKD, it doesn't mean that, these kind of diseases can't also happen. The most common kidney disease to occur with polycystic kidney disease is diabetic kidney disease. So I think I have a slide on that later on, but certainly, and it also goes along with the obesity piece, that, if we have diabetes, to do optimal control, and I am going to get into that in another slide. Oh, and in the next slide. So for sure, patients with diabetes have earlier onset of high blood pressure. They also have faster growth and faster decline in kidney function. So really, those with diabetes and PKD, the essential thing is early recognition of the disease, early and aggressive management, including dietary modification and weight loss, as well as early initiation of anti-diabetes medications. So things like metformin. Curiously, metformin has been the focus of studies specifically to slow progression of ADPKD. So it's a bit of a double benefit in the way starting metformin early in people with diabetes or pre-diabetes and polycystic kidney disease. What about blood pressure control? So the best study we have on this was called the HALT study, and it randomized people to aggressive blood pressure treatment versus more standard blood pressure treatment. I would say that even the standard arm was targeting 120/70 to 130/80, compared to their aggressive arm was between 95/60 to 110/75. So an aggressive, fairly low blood pressure target. They followed patients for 5 years and looked at differences in kidney size. So they did find a statistically significant difference that the people with lower blood pressures had slower progression. There were some people there was differences in the genotypes that people had, the types of PKD between the aggressive and the more standard blood pressure arms. Surely, I think it's reasonable to target as low a blood pressure as we can that doesn't create other symptoms. So knowing we're going to need to treat blood pressure for a long time, There's lots of blood pressure treatments that we can try and to tinker with to get the right mix, but certainly making sure that we're doing the best we can, especially in people with higher risk ADPKD, to make sure that we're treating blood pressure as aggressively as we can without causing any other problems. So I've already mentioned tolvaptan a couple times. There's been 2 large trials at this point that are the highest level of evidence, the Tempo trials and the Reprise trial. People may be familiar with these 2 studies. They are not a silver bullet, but it does slow progression by about 30%. So you can see the average rate of GFR decline was about 2.3 per year in the patients on treatment compared to 3.6 in the people that were in the placebo arm of that trial. It was fairly consistent across the 2 studies. There have been longer term observational studies. So that's where they looked at patients up 10, 15 years. And it seems like this kind of benefit does continue along. And so there really is, a real growing body of evidence and comfort around tolvaptan, especially in the people with the higher risk imaging classes. So those D and E, so the higher risk, bigger kidneys. That said, there are still pros and cons that we need to talk about. You need to talk about with your doctor if you're thinking about using this kind of therapy. There is the slower in progression. It does seem like there's less kidney stones and less pain events in people in tolvaptan, but it does mean that people pee, between 4 and 8 liters a day. So certainly makes you very thirsty. You need to drink lots. It does require monthly blood monitoring, which is, can be inconvenient. There is a 1 in 20 risk of reversible liver injury. That's why we need to do that monthly blood work. I would say that everybody who has monitoring, no one has run into irreparable harm to their liver as long as they're on that monitoring regime. There is a slight increase in risk of having gout. So if you've had problems with gout, you could talk to your doctor about treatments to try to prevent gout while you're on tolvaptan. And then certainly depending on your insurance background, there can be concerns or there is concerns that it is an expensive therapy. So I really think it has to be an individualized discussion between the treating doctor and the patient about the pros and cons and potential benefits and downsides of using tolvaptan. But if we look at family members and why there could be some differences between family members, part of it might be if one of them was able to tolerate this treatment and the other one wasn't, or the one was able to take a higher dose and was able to remember it more often and had less problems, or conversely, if the other family member had problems, maybe that could explain some of the differences in progression between family members. What about high cholesterol? So heart attacks and vascular disease is still the #1 cause of death for people with ADPKD. Chronic kidney disease itself is a big risk factor for heart disease. So that alone right there is, if you have advanced kidney, if your GFR is less than 60, then really the suggestion is that patients should be on lipid lowering or cholesterol lowering medications like the statins. Of course, again, this needs to be tailored to the risks and benefits of every individual patient. So again, it's a discussion, but generally speaking, early and use of statins seems like a good idea. There is suggestive, but certainly far from conclusive results that potentially statins could slow polycystic kidney disease. Again, that's mostly from model organisms. There was some study even in children that looked at that. And really the mechanism of action by which statins would slow polycystic kidney disease is unclear, I would say. All the same, certainly as chronic kidney disease or that GFR gets lower, the recommendations are for treatment to try to target, you know, an LDL cholesterol in the neighborhood of 2 or lower. What about the safety? So if you're going to take tolvaptan, and I just talked about liver injury, certainly people can get elevations in liver enzymes on statins. So, you know, liver injury is a concern. This is the safety data from the 2 large randomized trials, the Tempo and Reprise study. So 2,800 people, and they compared those that were on statins at baseline. So they didn't put anybody on them, but if they were on them during the study, they looked at the outcomes, and they did not find any significant evidence of harm. So in fact, the likelihood of having an increase in the liver enzymes was lower in the people that were on tolvaptan and a statin than the people that were on tolvaptan alone. I would also say that while there's the potential of this liver injury, that's why we need to do that blood work to watch for it. There are patients with severe liver disease that are on tolvaptan to try to help manage the water in those people with severe liver disease. So it is a challenging situation. Certainly, if people have elevated liver enzymes at baseline, it's generally viewed as a contraindication to tolvaptan therapy. And so you can talk about this with your doctor in your own situation. But generally speaking, it is safe to take a statin and tolvaptan together. So I've talked about some environmental factors. We talked about blood pressure and weight and diabetes and other kidney diseases. We talked about some different treatments, so blood pressure treatment, tolvaptan, that could kind of explain why in some family members, there's people that have more aggressive or earlier kidney disease and kidney failure, and other family members having slower progression of disease. So what about, is there additional genetic factors? So it's important to remember that you, as I said, you get 2 copies of your genes, one from your mom and one from your dad. So if your dad is the one with PKD, only half of your genes, apologies, only half of your genes are from your dad. So there's still the other half of your genes that could also be impacting how severe your polycystic kidney disease. As for your siblings on average, you share half with, because they also got it from the mom and dad. But actually, that's just an average. And that's why you may see some siblings who look very, very similar and some siblings that look very, very different. So potentially, the percentage of shared genes between those siblings can vary significantly. But on average, we share half our genes with our brothers and sisters, 25% with grandparents or aunts and uncles, 12.5% as first cousins. So certainly, while you may have the same mutation, that one change that caused the cysts in your kidney, there can be you know, a wide range in the rest of the genome, the rest of the genes that can impact a wide range of things. Things like your risk of having obesity, your risk of having high blood pressure, diabetes, or other forms of kidney disease can vary significantly over and above that PKD1 and PKD2 mutation. Something called digenic ADPKD. So, you know, it's possible that you can get mild kind of mutations in PKD1 or PKD2 from both your mom and your dad. Now, clearly this is pretty uncommon, but it can happen, and even rare mutations in other kind of kidney disease genes. So I'm going to leave that there, but those can also potentially modify, especially in families that have one person who has really aggressive or early onset ADPKD. Now, kind of the last kind of slide that I want to talk about is that as research has developed, we've come to learn that your disease, so what happens in those individual cysts? You have one copy of the gene that has the mutation that you got from your mom or your dad. But then there's a second hit. So it's called a somatic. So this is a mutation, a change in DNA that happens throughout life that ruins the other copy of the gene so that the cell has no functioning polycystin 1 or polycystin 2. We've only been able to learn about this in the last couple of years as our sequencing has become more effective. Most people think about acquired mutations or these changes in our DNA that happen throughout life leading to cancer, because those changes can, those cells, if they grow very quickly, that's what forms cancers, right? They grow these tumors, the outgrowths, because the cells are rapidly dividing. So those were the first acquired mutations we started learning about. But as we're taking tissue, so actual cysts from patients with polycystic kidney disease, we've learned that many or most of these cysts have a second mutation in the other copy of PKD1. So there's still lots to learn about this, and if we're able to see the rate at which these second hits are happening or what's causing these second hits to happen, so this is an active area of research, but we're really only starting to scratch the surface of these second types of mutations. And so I did want to talk about, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that the natural history of polycystic kidney disease is for those cysts to grow and the kidneys to grow over life. So I did want to say that there's been significant effort to try different treatments. So again, if you're well versed in PKD, you may have heard of some of these treatments along different stages of the pipeline. Unfortunately, these first three or first four really have proven ineffective at slowing the disease. And so they have really, attention has shifted away from them, I would say. There was a relatively recent study published on metformin that was suggestive and that larger studies are potentially required. So that's an active area of research and is quite exciting. There is a trial ongoing that's looking at a medication called bardoxolone. I'm not going to get into any depth in it, but you can watch out for that. The CFTR, so this is the same thing that leads to cystic fibrosis. So inhibiting that protein may slow the secretion of fluid into the cyst. So there's studies looking at that. And then you may be aware that there's a new class of diabetes medication called SGLT2 inhibitors, which have been really a knockout punch. That are, their use is expanding rapidly. It's the latest and greatest advancement in the treatment of diabetic kidney disease. So certainly people are asking, is it possible that SGLT2 inhibitors could be helpful in ADPKD? And then aldosterone antagonists also were recently published. They have not moved into clinical care, at least in my neighborhood, but are certainly around the corner and would be interesting to look at as well. Foam sclerotherapy, this is where we target and drain the largest cysts and put a sclerosing agent to make the cyst scar down so that it doesn't just reaccumulate or refill up with fluid. So again, there is some studies out that it is effective at reducing a couple of the very large cysts. So particularly if they're symptomatic, those large cysts, we don't have evidence that it slows progression of the disease as a whole. But again, so there's lots of areas of research, and there's lots of efforts to come up with new therapies. There has been progress over the last decade, I would say. That said, while we're able to slow progression a bit, ideally we'll get to the point where people may have cysts in their kidneys, but they don't reach kidney failure in a normal lifespan. So that's the ultimate goal. So with that, the take-home points I would say is that while ADPKD or polycystic kidney disease is bad luck, it's a change in our genes that leads to those cysts. and the progressive disease, you can reshuffle the deck in your favor. Don't smoke, stay well hydrated, drink lots of water, be fit and active and as lean as possible, trying to maintain a healthy body weight, a well-balanced diet of food that you make yourself, trying to have an average or a median salt and protein intake. If you're a high-risk patient, I think you should talk with your doctor about the pros and cons of tolvaptan. Certainly, if you have advanced kidney disease, consideration of a statin to lower your heart disease risk, especially if you have other risk factors, and treating, other kidney issues like blood pressure. I have controlled blood pressure there. So with that, I've reached my 50-minute. I could talk about PKD until I was blue in the face. Thank you very, very much for everybody who came and listened tonight. I'd be thrilled to take some questions or discussion, and hope to see everyone here soon. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lanktree. I'll give you about 10 seconds to catch your breath, and then we've got a whack of questions here for you. That was an excellent presentation, as always, highly informative. So we greatly appreciate that. Okay, we'll jump right into the questions if you're ready, Matt.
Yes.
Are the background mutation rates for second somatic mutations in PKD1 and 2 genes thought to be the same or different?
Great question. And I'm so excited, even just looking over some of the questions here. It's such an engaged patient group and such an engaged community that it's no shock that the questions are going to be tough and excellent. So, I mean, PKD1 is, I think it's 8 times bigger. So there's just way more opportunity for mistakes to happen. So it seems like in the sequencing studies that have been done to date, there is a higher risk of second somatic mutations in PKD1. There's no real evidence at this point that mutations in PKD1 or PKD2 happen at faster rates than anywhere else in the genome. So PKD1 or 2 is not involved in air checking or the development of mutations. Really, this is a hot topic, and my main CKD research even is looking at acquired mutations in blood cells. So we're learning more about these acquired mutations throughout life that don't lead to cancers. And it's really advancements in technology. We get a new telescope and we're able to see new things. And so it's really exciting area of research. I hope that answers that sufficiently.
Okay, we've got a part 2 from the same individual. Could PKD1 severity be greater because as a larger gene, PKD1 is more likely to accumulate second somatic mutations than PKD2 mutations? Therefore, the likelihood of cells having 2 defective PKD1 genes at times goes on is greater, all other things being equal?
It's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good hypothesis. That study that I showed there showed that it was usually both copies of the same gene. So the problems happen the worst when it's 2 copies of PKD1 that are having the disease. So we do talk about, so the fancy term is in cis or in trans. So in trans mean like a PKD2 mutation and a PKD1 mutation. Theoretically, that would also cause a phenotype or cause disease, though less so than if both copies of PKD1, say, are causing it. I don't think we have the answer to that question as yet. We need the real problem is that you need kidney tissue in order to look at the somatic rate. We can't biopsy kidneys very easily. It doesn't really happen in polycystic kidney disease because you hit the cysts and you run into all sorts of complications. So, interesting question. Can we look in urine? Can we find it in blood somehow? I mean, these are all kind of questions that we're thinking about. And it's an interesting hypothesis. Certainly the people with, the germ line, the one that's in all your cells, if it's in PKD1 and a more severe mutation type, they on average have more severe disease. But how those second hits contribute to the rate of progression is still an area of research.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Why do most clinical trials not include determining if participants have PKD1 or 2 affected genes as germline mutations?
So, well, the goal of trials is, the fancy word is pragmatic. So they always want it as easy as possible to enroll people, and they want it to represent the general population. So it's not standard practice for everybody with PKD to get genetic testing at this point. And that's because if it's so clear what the disease is, multiple people in the family have it, the imaging is consistent, then the best test to risk stratify someone to determine how severe their disease is imaging. And so the indication for genetic testing is somewhat weaker in that context from a true clinical standpoint, whether it's going to change what we do. And so when the goal is to enroll as many people as we can in those trials, if you mandate that they have to have genetic testing, it just makes it harder to enroll people in the studies. So that's kind of the short answer. Most of the big studies, whether it's, HALT or, they did a relatively good job at collecting biosamples so that they can retrospectively go back and do the genetic testing. That said, it costs money. Like every time you want to collect a sample when you enroll someone in those studies, it costs 50 or $100, and you multiply that times, a couple thousand people. Now you're talking about a couple $100,000, and it's so that's usually the decision of whether to do the genetic testing or not.
Okay, thank you for that. Twins, one has an aneurysm and the other doesn't. Why?
So we don't have there's no conclusive. So the challenge is that PKD is 1 in 500 or 1 in 1,000 in the population, and only about 1 in 20 people with PKD gets aneurysms. And so it gets hard to have enough people in one place that have all had genetic testing and have all had screening for aneurysms at an advanced enough age that they have them, even if they're going to get them eventually. So that's kind of a hard way for me to say that we don't know that the type of genetic really predicts aneurysms. We don't even know at this point, if better blood pressure control reduces. Theoretically, it makes sense that better blood pressure control, but we don't really know that. At this point, we know that people with family histories of aneurysms are at higher risk of having aneurysms. So that might help motivate us to say we should screen. The current recommendations are not even concrete on whether everybody with PKD needs aneurysm screening. If you don't have a family history, you don't have any risk factors, it's a little bit unclear. So it's probably because it's not all genetic, why one twin could have one and the other twin couldn't. It makes a difference too if they're monozygotic or dizygotic. So dizygotic are essentially just brother and sister that lived in the same sac, as opposed to they came from the same egg. So that can also be a difference too. But.
Okay, thank you. Is non-truncating mutation the same as hypomorphic mutation?
Yeah, so non-truncating is so the technical term is actually missense mutations, and that's where there's a change in amino acid. So a hypomorphic is something that has been seen. Usually the effect is relatively smaller. So if it's common enough in the population that we think that it's probably not absolutely causal of the disease, certainly they overlap. So whether someone calls it a specific mutation hypomorphic, or hypomorphic mutations are missense, but not all missense mutations are hypomorphic. So okay. Hopefully that clears that up. Clear as mud.
Okay. Does caffeine have an adverse effect on polycystic kidney disease? I've seen contradictory scientific reporting on this question.
Definitely. And it's so, like all of our dietary interventions and nutritional epidemiology evidence, it's really reliant. It's tough to get a concrete answer on it. There have also been studies where they gave mega doses of caffeine to model organisms, and it seemed to, so like in mice or in rats, and it seemed that they had faster progressive disease. personally, I would say moderation is fine. The effect size of the caffeine intake in the big observational studies, so where they take just lots of people and they ask them, do you drink coffee? And they look at how severe they are. I mean, there's lots of problems with that kind of study design, which is probably beyond what I want to talk about tonight, but I would suffice it to say, as long as you're having 1 cup a day, I think it's probably okay. I would recommend staying away from your double. So, you know, like lots of double cream, double sugar is probably more of a concern than the caffeine.
Okay. I was wondering if you had any studies that showed underweight patients have faster progression. My insurance company declined me and specified weight was a reasoning, but if anything, I am underweight or of average weight. A great presentation, thank you.
Well, thanks for the kind feedback. So there is, you know, there's certainly suggestion, especially in advanced kidney disease. So people like that are on dialysis, that if you are underweight, it can actually be, you know, it's associated with worse outcomes. So we're talking about BMIs of 15 or 18, definitely below 20. People that are malnourished, so they're so unwell, they can't eat, or, you know, so that kind of situation is associated with issues. I can't speak about the certain situation with insurance companies and why they decide to accept or decline. Certainly, I think targeting a healthy body weight and a healthy BMI, BMI measurement has its limitations as well. So even putting like firm guidelines of like BMI from 20 to 28, I mean, has challenges. Clearly, we all have different body types and body styles, and what our ideal weight is going to vary between people. So that's why I really try to focus on having a healthy, balanced diet and being fit and active, and you know, not focusing on just being super slim or you know, and really focusing on a healthy body weight.
Sticking with the BMI just for a moment, the next question asks, how can I calculate a proper BMI when my liver and kidneys are huge and significantly add to my weight?
So that's, and I mean, that just fits right into what I'm saying, that there's problems even with BMI. And that's why I really hesitate to put like BMI cutoffs. You know, certainly if you have large liver and kidney mass that's contributing, that's gonna, and frankly, I really worry about patients that have, you know, they look malnourished to me. Their arms are very small and they have large, I mean, that is concern that, you know, we need to be looking at what options we can do to help that situation, because absolutely body mass index will be not representative in those kind of situations. And so again, that's focusing on a healthy body weight for you rather than a firm cutoff.
Okay. Next question. Do we know what the mechanism of action for metformin against ADPKD is?
So it's complicated is the short answer. And so metformin has been around for a very long time, and it's actually what we call a pretty messy drug. So as opposed to the newer medications that, you know, are targeted very specifically to one receptor or one situation, metformin, because it's an older class of medications, works in multiple different ways. The fancy term is it works on the AMPK pathway, if you've heard about that. There's evidence that the polycystic cells have, the fancy term is metabolic reprogramming. So these cells become more avid for glucose because they're rapidly dividing and growing. And so metformin interferes with that glucose utilization in those kidney cells to try to slow the growth. Now, there have been other fancy, you know, more specific and more targeted. The benefit of metformin is that we have so much data on safety, because it's been around forever and it's been treating diabetic patients for so long, that we have a good idea about the side effects and the long-term safety of that kind of medication. And so it's been, the term is repositioned. So it's being used, it's being targeted for a new disease, you taking advantage of all the previous knowledge we have of it. Certainly it is a question too, like what happens if it's being used at the same as tolvaptan? It's a totally different mechanism of action. So theoretically, if it's, the benefits would hopefully be additive. Who knows, multiplicative, who knows? But so certainly, again, that's an area of research.
Okay. Next question. My paternal grandmother had 3 siblings, and all 4 of them have or had PKD. I was shocked to find that out. How common is it that all children end up getting the PKD gene? Why may that have happened?
So statistically, it's a half to the power. So if you have 3 of them, it's a half to the 3. So that's 1/8. So that's 12% chance. So the likelihood of 3 siblings all having it from affective parent is about 1 in 10, or 1 in 8. So it can happen. That's certainly, much more common than winning the lottery. It is unlikely at the same time. That said, there is unusual genetic circumstances where the cells are motivated to pass on the one, even though it has that mutation. So without getting into too much of the nitty gritty, it is possible to have a parent who always passes it on. So there's kind of 2 reasons, either just statistically unlikely, there is the rare kind of reason. And I should bring up at this point that there is pre-implantation genetic diagnostics at this point is a possibility. There are experts specifically in that to counsel and move through that whole process. And so if that is something that people want, they can seek that out.
Great recommendation. Thank you. Next question. Why some ADPKD patients have more cysts on their liver than their kidneys?
Another really interesting question. It does seem that people with PKD2 mutations have more severe liver phenotypes and less severe kidney phenotypes. I wish I could give, and even so it appears that women have more severe liver phenotypes than men. There is a hypothesis that it's related to estrogen exposure for a couple reasons. One, women that have had multiple children tend to have more severe liver disease. People that have had long exposures to estrogen containing oral contraceptive pills, birth control pills, tend to have maybe slightly more severe liver involvement. As well, the growth of the liver cysts tends to slow down after menopause. So those are all lines of evidence suggesting that estrogen has something to do with it. We don't have a great answer though, why some people with ADPKD have really severe polycystic liver disease and others don't. So I wish I had a better answer for that. There's no rationale that tolvaptan should help polycystic livers. There have been some people that have suggested that. There's definitely not firm evidence of it, and the rationale doesn't make sense to me, but there's that discussion. There is other options for polycystic liver disease. And so again, talk to your doctor and potentially a liver specialist as well if you have severe liver involvement.
Right. This is a question I love. Which master's program would you recommend to a student who wants to work in researching on ADPKD?
So, great question. And I think, by all means, send me an email. Let me know. I'd be happy to talk about if there's someone in your life that is interested in it. Of course, I'd say, oh, come to McMaster, do it with me. But for sure, there's excellent training programs, both at the graduate and at the, like for science type, for more clinical, like after medical school or residency types. So there's multiple paths that you can go. And certainly, in Toronto is where I did my postdoc under York Pay. in polycystic kidney disease. But certainly I would be interested in hosting someone too. So
You're inspiring people around the globe here, Matt. That's wonderful.
I could give more global answers too. So if people have global questions about that, by all means, give me an email too. I mean, obviously there's a really tight-knit field of polycystic kidney disease researchers, and frankly, they all know each other. So
Okay, next question is, would an ultra marathon running be ill-advised for someone with PKD because it's stressful on the kidneys?
You're a tougher person than I if you're into ultra marathon running. Just marathon running seems like a bad idea to me, but jokes aside, I think you need to do what makes you happy, and I think you have to live your own life. And people say, oh, can I play hockey or can I play football? I mean, definitely cyst ruptures and peeing blood is not great. Certainly I would say anything in life to an extreme probably carries risks. Only you as an individual can judge the benefits and risks to you. And so I would certainly never say to someone they shouldn't do anything. But you as an individual need to weigh the pros and cons, and I would take into account your disease severity, and you're going to have to listen to your body. And if it says that you shouldn't be doing it, then you should probably listen to your body.
Right. How long can a person visibly pass blood through their urine after a cyst rupture?
So typically it resolves within a few days, certainly less than a week. If it persists longer than that, more investigations. So if you're having blood in your pee, I would be reaching out. It's never normal to have blood in your pee, so please don't stay at home and tough it out. Call people, let people know. So whether it's your family doctor, your nephrologist, let people know. Often I suggest holding different medications in the context of blood in the pee. We want to be conscious whether it's trauma related, if there's a kidney stone, so if there's pain associated with the blood or not, if there's signs of infection, so like fevers or white counts. So I would have a very low threshold. It's never normal to have blood in your pee. Call for help. Call somebody and get some blood work done. Get your urine checked. Make sure everything's okay. Like I say, usually it should resolve within a couple days, and if it doesn't, it's a more severe problem. Notably, if your urine, it's different if your urine is like cranberry juice or tomato juice. People kind of freak out when I ask that, but like tomato juice can cause blood clots in the pee to the point that it starts blocking the flow of urine. So that causes more problems than if it's just like a little bit of cranberry juice. It's a lot less likely to be causing a big problem, especially if it's not associated with pain. But at the same time, it's never wrong to ask for advice and speak to your doctor.
Great. Next question. Would you recommend taking allopurinol to prevent gout if taking tolvaptan and experiencing gout episodes?
I think you should really talk to your doctor about it. It comes down a bit to your uric acid level and the frequency of gout attacks. If you've had a gout attack, and especially if your uric acid level is high, then yes, I would be encouraging. It also depends a little bit on your kidney function. So there's a few variables in there. So I would talk to your doctor about it. Certainly if you're having gout issues and your uric acid is high and your kidney function is good, then prevention with allopurinol is a good idea. The evidence for allopurinol slowing kidney disease progression out of the context of PKD, I would say, is weak in the absence of gout attacks. So I wouldn't say taking it specifically for slowing kidney disease progression, but certainly for preventing gout.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you comment on ADPKD that is rapidly progressing, but the kidneys atrophy rather than enlarge?
So the kidneys enlarging is, the fancy word is pathognomonic, meaning that it is synonymous with ADPKD. So if the kidneys are shrinking instead of getting larger, you do not have ADPKD. So again, I would encourage talking to your nephrologist, or your, if you don't have one, getting one. There's other classes of disease. So which I'm not going to get into real deep detail, but so congenital abnormalities of the kidney and urinary tract, or CACUT, medullary sponge kidney, autosomal dominant tubular interstitial kidney disease. So there's a whole bunch of fancy words. There's a whole differential for people that have cysts in their kidneys with shrinking kidneys as opposed to growing kidneys, but it is not ADPKD.
Okay. We have a question here. Are there any studies to suggest that tolvaptan will affect getting pregnant or affect the pregnancy at all?
So definitely people were excluded if they were pregnant. So if you are pregnant or trying to get pregnant, I would recommend stopping tolvaptan. Tolvaptan is, I tell it to people, it's like investing in the future. It's, you know, it's not like a cure. And so if you're trying to get pregnant, or you are pregnant for sure, you don't want to be taking tolvaptan then. You want to be, focusing on your important task, which is growing the baby. So no tolvaptan in pregnancy.
Okay, thank you. Could cancer treatments cause faster deterioration in PKD? Colon cancer at age 30, kidney failure at age 40, approximately 15 years sooner than other family members with PKD. Cancer treatments.
It's a broad question that I think you really need to talk to your kidney doctor and your oncologist. So there's lots of different treatments. It depends on the type of cancer and whether, I mean, that's a whole, there's no short answer to that, unfortunately. But I mean, certainly you need the best treatment for your cancer if you have cancer, even if it causes problems with your kidneys.
Right. Okay, next question is, my dad has diverticulitis. Do you recommend getting any tests regularly to check for myself? Or do you think a healthier lifestyle would make more of a difference without needing tests?
Yeah, so diverticulitis is an inflammation of those diverticula, so those outpouching in the colon. It happens in people with ADPKD, especially if they have problems with slow bowel motions. So constipation, if it's an issue, is certainly a risk factor for recurrent inflammation or infections of the bowel, which is what diverticulitis is. So certainly fit, lean, healthy diet, appropriate use of laxatives to make sure that you're not getting fecal loading, you're not getting full of poop. So those would be the best preventions for diverticulitis. There's no need for testing for asymptomatic diverticula or anything like that. Just having healthy bowel habits.
Okay. Why do males have faster progressing disease than females on average?
Tough question. And we don't exactly know the answer. Probably because women, I was going to make a bad joke, but the short answer is we don't really know. All you can do is change the things that you can change, and you can't change your biological sex. So, shuffle the deck in your favor and do the things you can do.
You suggested PKD patients should do what makes them happy. Given that, is it really a good idea to scuba dive?
I don't know of any problem with scuba diving and ADPKD. So it's similarly, I'd say if it sinks your boat, go for it.
There you go. Why is there so little follow-up on your original PKD existing kidneys after kidney transplant? They still cause health problems, yet no one checks them.
So generally speaking, after transplant, the original cystic kidneys do shrink a little bit. So if they do have more imaging, typically they do shrink a bit. The reason why they don't get follow-up is because, so one, we hesitate to cut out kidneys unless there's a reason. So unless they're infected or causing severe pain or morbidity, so causing symptoms, going through the surgery, which is not a big deal, to have a kidney removed isn't of benefit. And if there's any what we call residual kidney function, so if the kidneys are working at all, then we want to keep that amount of pee that they're making. So we don't take out the kidneys unless there's a problem, essentially. There isn't need for routine checking of them in any way. Many people have looked into if there's higher risks of, say, renal cell carcinoma, so kidney cancers in polycystic kidney disease. Kidneys, I'd say the literature is a little bit shady and not that great to answer that question in particular, but certainly, you know, there isn't a need for routine screening. There's no like every 5 years I need a CT scan or something like that, because that would just lead to more contrast exposure. And if it's not causing, now that said, if you have a kidney transplant and you start having blood in your urine, that's a reason to go get imaging to see if there's problems in your original cystic kidneys.
We have I think this is more a compliment than a question. Thank you for your presentation. It is great to get information presented to us without the dumbing it down that we sometimes get as patients. So
it's always a challenge. I thank you for that. And it's always a challenge because, you know, I'm really lucky to have some involvement with patient partners, and they evaluate things like we have what are called lay summaries, which when I talk about my research and trying, it's always a difficult balance. And the fact is that audiences are varied, but patients, especially PKD patients, are often very knowledgeable, very motivated and involved. And so it's always a balance in trying to avoid jargon while appropriately getting the message across. So thanks for the compliment. I really appreciate it.
A great balance on your part. There is a question, if you could just touch on the difference again between PKD1 and PKD2. We have a couple questions on them surrounding which is worse.
So the PKD1 mutations are generally the more severe. PKD2 are generally milder. Now that's said, you know, there's substantial variation. So where I showed these survival curves early in the presentation, this just tells you the median. And so if you take this line, the people that had the most severe mutations, there's still substantial movement around that middle, around the mean. And so even though if we took the distribution of people with PKD2 mutations, I think you can see my arrow, the distribution would be like this. So on average, they have milder disease, but there's still substantial overlap between the two, which is why, you know, determining the mutation can be helpful if the diagnosis is unclear, but the best way if you're 40 or 40 years old is to do the imaging to actually look at how advanced the disease is.
Okay. Next question.
And I don't think
the
question wasn't about like pathophysiological differences between PKD1 and 2. I mean, the short answer to that question is that PKD1 and 2 work together. They form a dimer that moves through our cells, and they make a pore, an opening that allows for movement of calcium in and out of this hair-like thing called a cilia. So that's as deep as I'm going to get, but they both work together and they exist together in the cell kind of, so they're related to each other. But as I say, the ones have the more severe, but there is overlap.
Okay. How early is too early to start statins? Do you think the pros and cons for its use is warranted? Also, my liver enzymes increased sharply after 3 months of tolvaptan. Would adding a statin be enough to try starting tolvaptan again?
So the statin shouldn't improve the liver profile. It's just not really a risk factor. There wasn't significant differences in that study that I showed. Certainly, if you have a rise in your liver enzymes, getting input from your nephrologist is of great importance. There are guidelines for retrialing tolvaptan. The rise in liver enzymes quite often are related to other medications, so like Tylenol usage, especially some antibiotics or antifungal medications, or binge alcohol intake is a very common reason for liver enzyme raises that can get people very nervous and then they stop the medication. Especially if we have a known cause of it, we're going to avoid that. We can retrial tolvaptan, especially if the liver enzymes have returned back to normal. The degree of increase in liver enzymes is also important. So without giving specific health advice, I'd say you really need to talk to your doctor about what was happening when you had the rise in liver enzymes and what the pros and cons of being on treatment are.
Great advice. Okay, a question here. As a practicing pharmacist who has ADPKD, do you work with pharmacists closely? Do you have any recommendations on certificates, education to further study the kidney?
For pharmacists. So certainly pharmacists are involved heavily as people become more like later in their disease trajectory, I would say. So as GFR gets below 30, certainly there becomes a larger role for pharmacists as people at that point are usually on multiple medications. Earlier in the disease course, people are typically only on 2 or 3 or 4 medications. And so the role of pharmacy is somewhat less. I would say there is certainly opportunities. I would say, so people that are familiar, Otsuka has the Origin program that helps support people that are on tolvaptan. So if you're on tolvaptan, you can get access to pharmacists for, looking up for drug interactions or specific advice through that program. For people who are not on tolvaptan, I think most community pharmacists, unfortunately, would be relatively unfamiliar with ADPKD and some of the challenges. As a pharmacist and a PKD patient, I think you're in an exceptional situation to become an advocate for that and probably to help teach other pharmacists and help spread the word and increase awareness. I don't have a great, I think probably you would need to do some of your own research to look at programs to become like an ADPKD knowledgeable pharmacist. I'm sure there are programs such as that available, but I don't have a great answer other than that.
Okay. My uncle has, this is another one testing your quick math that you proved us earlier. My uncle has ADPKD and 4 kids, but none of his kids have PKD. What is the percentage of that happening?
So that's a half to the power 4. So that's 1/16, which is 6.25%. So it's about 1 in 20.
Amazing, amazing. I didn't know that there was going to be so much math involved tonight. You're keeping me on my toes. It's better you're answering than me. PKD runs predominantly in my family. I was the first to be genetically tested. I have neither PKD 1 or 2, but clinically have the disease. I am assuming clinical management will remain the same.
Yeah, the good news, I would, I hesitate to talk about individual situations because I don't want it construed as medical advice. Certainly you should speak to your physician. The good news is that generally speaking, people without a PKD1 or PKD2 mutation, they may have a mutation in a different gene, they may have a different cause, but generally speaking, the rate of disease progression is slower in those groups of diseases. So now I would say that's generally, there are certainly some circumstances where that's not the case. So, keeping on things like your kidney function and your blood pressure and whether you're having gout or not, and talking to your kidney doctor would really be the keys.
Are some regions in the country, world, do they have greater concentrations of PKD?
Great question. Actually, part of my postdoc was looking at sequencing of populations from around the world. And we found very similar rates of PKD mutations regardless of ancestral background. So there can be something called a founder effect. So there are some areas where like the ancestor that formed a population, I think there's some pockets in Newfoundland where there's higher rates of PKD within that small population. But generally speaking, you know, African, Asian, Indian, all populations have PKD.
Right. Thank you. At what age do you recommend getting screened for PKD prior to symptoms?
It depends a little bit on disease family severity, but generally speaking, you know, once you're an adult, 20 years old, I think it's worth getting an ultrasound, 18 or 20. Certainly, if you have high blood pressure, you want to do it earlier. If you have blood in your pee, if there's other problems or flank pain, then you're going to want earlier imaging. But if you're completely asymptomatic and well, I would wait till I was an adult and then start with a screening ultrasound. And then that kind of gives us lots of time to work into what the long-term plan is, because we're trying to prevent something, you know, 30 or 40 years down the line, right?
Right.
So I think knowledge is power, but we don't want to create anxiety either.
Okay, thank you. If disease-expressing cells require glucose, do they also promote muscle tissue breakdown into glucose, especially on a low-carb diet, or is there no evidence of that?
What was that again?
If disease-expressing cells require glucose,
Yeah.
do they also promote muscle cell tissue breakdown into glucose, especially on a low-carb diet?
So, you know, we don't have any, there's a lot of I don't knows that answer that. I mean, all our cells use glucose. There's no real communication between the kidney cells and like muscle cells. I mean, maybe with hormones or something, but I can't provide a real specific answer to that, unfortunately.
Okay. The next question, based on what you said earlier, is it uncommon to have the PKD kidneys removed at or before transplant? And we hear this a lot from patients. Matt, I feel so full with these 2 footballs, can't imagine a third kidney and would like to have them removed.
Yep. And so that gets back to it does vary a little bit center to center, transplant surgeon to transplant surgeon, and whether you get what's called a preemptive, so taking a kidney out to make room before you get the transplant in or not, or whether you do it after the transplant. You know, avoiding dialysis is generally a great idea, but if we do a preempt, so if we remove the kidney before, then that usually requires dialysis before you get your transplant. So, you know, unless we want any residual kidney function, so anything they're providing, we want to take advantage of. So we generally don't take them out unless we have to.
Right. Okay. The next question here, has there been any evidence that Ozempic has any benefit in PKD other than the benefit of weight loss?
Yeah, so Ozempic is one of these new classes, GLP-1 receptor antagonists, that has really been great for diabetes. It actually prevents kidney disease and heart disease, especially in people with you know, obesity. As mentioned, there's no studies of it in ADPKD at all. So it's really, that said, you know, I think if obesity is an issue, especially early in the disease course with normal kidney function, you got to talk to your doctor about it. We don't know anything about how it affects ADPKD specifically, but certainly there's lots of apparent benefit in those with diabetes and or kidney disease.
Okay. The next question here, I've recently discovered that postmenopausal women are more prone to UTIs. I'm concerned that these might lead to kidney infections. Is there a connection? Advice? Side note, I sometimes have false positives on the DIP test and later it comes back negative. Yeah,
so great. 2 great questions. So the first thing I would say is talk to either your family doctor, your gynecologist, or your urogynecologist. Sometimes local estrogen, so things like Premarin creams, can help with preventing urinary tract infections in postmenopausal women. It's certainly out of my scope of practice. I wouldn't be prescribing it. You really need to see a urologist, a gynecologist, or a family doctor that's more familiar with the treatment of that. You know, people talk about like hygiene things, but I think that that's a bunch of hooey. I think most people, you know, have generally, so I don't think that's really a contributor personally. I think it is quite important, as mentioned, that, you know, asymptomatic bacteriuria is quite common in women. So where you can do a urinalysis, like a dip, that shows that there's some white blood cells or red blood cells or even bacteria in the urine, but it's not causing an infection. If that's the case, if we give antibiotics, we can breed resistance. And so making sure that you send urinalysis for cultures to make sure that there's actually an organism there at sufficient quantity to be causing an infection, not just having bacteria in your urine, before taking antibiotics. So that's maybe a high answer, but I would encourage you, if you're having symptoms, to get urine cultures done, to talk to your family doctor. There's cystitis. There's nothing special about PKD and cystitis versus anybody else. So, yeah.
Okay. Someone kindly commented here, just going back to the conversation about finding space for the third kidney. They say that their third kidney is in their groin area and it's not an issue. They were worried too, but all is good. So a little bit of comfort for those worrying about the space.
Definitely.
We are well into borrowed time with Dr. Lanktree. I jinxed myself.
I gotta get that Raptors game. What's going on in the Raptors game?
When he asked me earlier if we were going to be on time, I said I'm always on time, and here we are. So we've answered the majority of the questions in the question and answer. There are a few that we'll try and power through a few more here, Matt, from the chat, and then we'll put a pin in this. What baseline for obesity did they use when you were speaking to the BMI?
It's either 25 or 28. I can't recall exactly, but that neighborhood would be the referent. Certainly 30 is overweight, and I think 35 is obese.
Obese, okay. Would you say that a Mediterranean diet could also be beneficial despite the higher amount of carbohydrates?
I really would encourage, again, I mean, all of the fad type diets, I think I'm a big fan of the Canada Food Guide personally. And I think reducing caloric intake, increasing fruits and vegetables, you know, really focusing on lower sugar vegetables. I'm not sure there's any secret to like the olive oil in the Mediterranean diet. Maybe. Certainly, like the big trials of the Mediterranean diet that were initially positive just in general health. There was questions about the reporting of them subsequently, and a lot of them have been retracted. So, I mean, it's really tough because every patient asks me about dietary advice, and really it's the lowest level of evidence we have that. So I think focusing on, you know, balanced diet, aiming for a healthy body weight, being as fit and active as you can be, avoiding sugar sweetened beverages, avoiding simple sugars. You know, we all know that we can't have too many desserts or like too many chips, but crisps, like all the salt and fat in that. You know, we all have our Achilles heels and our things that we really latch onto. But I think like the advice that your mom probably would have told you is probably still the best advice.
Okay, great. Moderate wine consumption, does it have an adverse effect on PKD?
So again, you know, this is a perfect example that people that consume alcohol and are moderate amounts, 1 or 2 glasses, often have higher socioeconomic or other things that can make it seem like they do better. I think probably while I enjoy a glass of wine every now and then, it probably isn't good for you. It isn't good for your kidney. I mean, it's not bad for your kidneys per se, but it's not great for your liver. It's not great for your waistline. It's probably not great, but like caffeine, I think we all have to live and enjoy life as well. So I would say, you know, moderate, less than 1 unit per day per, you know, without binge consumption, it's probably okay.
Okay, just going through some of these are doubles.
I do see one here about the mRNA-based therapies.
Yes.
Yeah, exciting. I haven't heard anything about trials specifically in ADPKD. Maybe this patient knows about it. You know, it's not specific to the disease mechanism of ADPKD, but if it prevents inflammation and fibrosis, maybe it'll be effective. I mean, similarly, most of the therapies I put on that slide are not, other than tolvaptan really, are not specific to the pathophysiology of the disease. They're more chronic kidney disease treatments. So seems like a good idea. I can't really say whether it's going to be effective or not at this point, but certainly some of the animal and cell studies are encouraging.
Okay, thank you. If you had ablation of cysts on the liver, would you recommend doing more ablations to ensure the liver doesn't squash the right kidney?
So again, I don't want to be construed for patient advice, so I can't speak about you know, individual cases, but I would say in general, it comes down to the skill and of the technical operator, i.e. the interventional radiologist who does the procedure, whether they think it's a good idea or not, in context with the patient and the treating nephrologist or hepatologist. Certainly it can vary, you know, if you have one 12-centimeter cyst, that's different than if your cyst is completely replaced, or your liver is completely replaced with numerous smaller cysts. Then draining any few cysts is only going to change the percentage of the volume by a small amount. So it really depends on, you know, the distribution and the size and the symptoms. And
A lot of factors. Okay.
yeah.
Could there be a longitudinal genetic link to a first-time mutation?
I don't understand. A longitudinal link to a first-time mutation. I mean, like those acquired mutations that I was talking about?
Possibly. Maybe we can get that person, if they're still on, to just elaborate a bit, and we'll go down to the next one in the meantime. Do you recommend, oh no, we did that one. I had a kidney transplant 5 years ago. I did have one kidney removed, but my native kidney continues to get bigger. Just wondering if you would recommend getting the cysts drained.
So again, like if there isn't one predominant, it really needs to be based on symptoms and you know, ideally we want to maintain the function of the kidney that's there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is a fun one. If I was part of a genetic study in the 80s at Mac with multiple members of my family with PKD, is there a way to find out which mutation I have?
I mean, if it was in the 80s,
Go back to the
know,
hospital?
you would have to contact, I don't know. You'd have to contact whoever did it. If it was in the 80s, it would have had to go through medical genetics, not through a nephrologist if it was at McMaster. So, okay. You know, realistically, it's probably easier just to do it again.
Start over, right?
Okay. If it's 30 years old.
Okay. Lots of thank yous, awesome presentations. Everyone appreciates you, Matt. So don't let this go to your head. Okay, I think we're down to the
really
last.
An outstanding community, you know, and I would say
as engaged as it
people,
gets.
Exactly. Whether it's the Walk to the Moon fundraisers or, you know, all the efforts that are going on with the PKD Foundation, it's really inspiring.
It absolutely is. I love it. Okay, do very large 32-centimeter kidneys cause issues with your tailbone? This individual's getting little shocks that cause unbelievable discomfort, not pain like hitting your funny bone. So severe pain on the tailbone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to hear that this person's having a lot of issues, it sounds like, and there's no doubt that, you know, huge kidneys cause problems. They cause pain is common. Pain management is still relatively limited, I would say at this point. There are options you can talk about with your doctor, but it is it is possible to have neuropathic type pain. It is also important to say though that other causes of back pain are also prevalent. So people can still have degenerative disc disease or, other mechanical back pain and muscle back pain. So just because you have kidney cysts doesn't mean that, but at the same time, if a patient, not you, I'm just saying in general, if patients have really large cysts and are having pain syndromes related to it, it's probably connected. Like I say, we don't usually, generally speaking, want to take the kidneys out unless there's a really good reason for it though.
Okay, I think we're now getting more updates about the Raptors losing than questions. So I think we'll take this pause, Matt, to cut you loose. I thank everyone for that amazing Q&A. I haven't put a presenter through the ringer like that in a long time, Matt. So good luck sleeping tonight after all that excitement. But thank you so much.
I might go have a glass of wine myself. So
moderation, as long as it's in moderation. Well, thank you again for giving us your time and overtime. Fantastic presentation, and we look forward to welcoming you again in the future.
Talk to you soon, Jeff. Thanks everyone for coming.
Okay, and everyone, that concludes tonight's presentation. As I mentioned at the beginning, I do encourage you to join our mailing list, visit npkd.ca, sign up, get our monthly e-newsletters. It's the best way to stay connected, to be in the know on future events like this, which we have coming throughout the year. So thank you all. Have a great night and go Raptors.